It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Changemakers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. In 2006, after building the best-selling franchise Don't Sweat the Small Stuff with her husband Richard, author Kristine Carlson faced a shattering loss, the sudden death of her beloved spouse. She came to understand intimately how our losses are our defining moments and that how we go through them shapes us. Kristine's path offers a life-altering map for navigating the journey from loss to joy. She is the author of the book, From Heartbreak to Wholeness, The Hero's Journey to Joy. Welcome, Kristine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Joan. Thanks so much for having me.
Kristine, I love your book and I love this topic because, like you, everything that I'm doing today was the result of tremendous loss. In a period of 6 months, my 23-year marriage ended, my mother died, and my sister died. And so I understand everything that you write about, and I'm really excited about this conversation because your story, my story, the story of so many others, they really illustrate that you can find joy and happiness on the other side of an experience that really does rock your world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a lot to go through in a short period of time. And, I often hear that from people that, they lose one family member, then they lose another. And, it makes for a very difficult change and transition. But you're right. We can all return to joy if we do our healing work. And most of the time, I think, and you probably find this too, that after we've gone through great loss, we come out the other side, we're actually living better versions of ourselves because our lives take on such a deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm. I recently spoke with David Kessler, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the grief model, and he is working on another stage in the model, which he calls meaning, because he said when you go through tremendous loss and grief, most people try to make sense of it. They try to find meaning in their life from that. And your work, it's the same thing. I meet so many people like you who take that pain and they take that loss and they transform it into something so meaningful and important.
Yeah, oftentimes you hear people say that everything happens for a reason, and I kind of have a different take on that. I think that everything happens and we find the reason why it happens, and that's how we find meaning, and that's how we process, that we need to grow. I think our souls came here to grow, and, oftentimes it's our losses, it's the difficult things in life that really shine the light on our growth and really, forces us to do our inner work. And I think that's the great benefit. It's not anything that any of us ask for, but certainly it's something that we all will go through in our lifetimes. We will all have major changes and transitions and also major losses in our lifetime.
Tell us about Richard and what your relationship was like.
Well, Richard was, as you would have suspected him to be, he was a very light human being, very lighthearted, a really happy guy. I think he had a high level of innate happiness he was born with, and he knew from a very early age that he was going to probably write and teach the world something about happiness. Some of the early stories of his life are when he was 11 years old, he named his dog Happy. And he was a really great tennis player, slated number 1 at Pepperdine when I met him in college. And he used to read Wayne Dyer and used to read different psychology books in order to get an edge on his own competitive nature. But then he found that he was so intrigued, and he was so intrigued with the prospect of psychology and personal growth that he found that he was a healer, and he started a career as a Rolfer, which is a bodywork therapist, and then got his master's and PhD in psychology. And then we studied a very early form of what would be considered maybe kind of on the lines of positive psychology. Richard was a pioneer of his time. He was one of the very first psychologists and authors to look at the human being as being a positive person overall, that our mental state and well-being is something that we can access and that sometimes we get off kilter. But he didn't look at, he didn't really believe in traditional therapy in the sense of that it was super valuable to continue to hash up your past. I mean, he thought that, certainly looking at your past in order to move forward was valuable, but not to sit and talk about your problems and commiserate about your problems. So he would have been one of the early authors to talk about some principles that really pointed to mental health and well-being, like how our thoughts matter and how we live in separate realities and how our moods matter to our experience of life and how present moment living is really the key to happiness. These are the kinds of things that he was talking about, 25, 30 years ago, which were relatively new to psychology, but are now, of course, commonplace. So in a nutshell, Richard and I had a really amazing life together. We had a really wonderful marriage. We have 2 daughters, and they are now grown, but at the time of his death, they were just 14 and 17. And so it was a very difficult time for our family. He was only 45, I was 43. We were really at a peak experience of our lives when he died of a pulmonary embolism on a flight to New York. So before that moment, we thought he was relatively healthy. We had no idea that he was really struggling with his health at that point. So it was quite a shock.
Kristine, what was it like for you after you lost him?
Well, I mean, you can all imagine. My life was shattered at the news that my husband had died on a flight. It was a complete shock. I call that, your initiation by crisis. It was certainly my initiation. And I say initiation because, I sort of chose a very loose depiction of the hero's journey in my books to talk about healing, because we often find ourselves living on one timeline, and then suddenly something happens. It shatters our world as we know it, and it sends us on a totally new trajectory in life. And certainly that's what Richard's death did for my daughters and I. We, were living our lives. It was busy. It was a busy time with 2 girls in high school and sports and, doing full-time career. Richard was. I was full-time mom and, holding space for him. So even though I had written with him, I had written Don't Split the Small Stuff in Love and Don't Split the Small Stuff for Women, I wasn't in full ownership of my career as an author because I was in full swing of what it meant to be, the main person in our home, managing home for my family and for my husband. So my life and my daughter's life shattered. It really did. And, at that point, I did my very, very best to hold their space so that they could grieve healthily while going through tremendous grief myself. And, it took us a couple years to get our feet on the ground. It wasn't like an instantaneous, I'm going to suddenly just move through this and be happy. It wasn't like that. It was a lot of tears and a lot of deeper understanding of what it means to be human and what it means to allow your soul to go from being wounded to healed. And that was really my journey. That was really my daughter's journey as well.
What do you think was your turning point when you decided that you didn't want to go down that path? I know for me, I was really going into a dark hole. I was going into a really dark place. And I knew that I needed to pull myself out for my children, my 2 sons. And I knew that I didn't want to live my life in that way any longer. And I think that while it's not an immediate choice, I do think that there is a choice that you make when you say, I'm not going to be that victim or live this way.
Well, the thing is, I think that we all go down that road to some degree, when we first have a life-shattering loss. And, I decided pretty early on because of the background that I had in, with my work with Richard and just all the tools. I've done a lot of personal growth work in my lifetime already, and I had decided really early on I could see myself doing this loss two ways. And one would be I would pull the covers up over my head and I would just disappear, down the dark hole, or I would pull the covers off every day and put my feet over the side of the bed and stand. And it was really getting up and knowing that I had been really blessed in life, that I knew I'd had great love. I wasn't at the early stages of grief grateful for that great love because I was experiencing such pain in the loss of it, but I knew that I had been blessed. I knew that the best way that I could honor my life with Richard and honor him was to stand up and move and keep going for my daughters and, keep moving into life and keep allowing my grief to heal me. I didn't really think of grief as the enemy. I thought of this time period as very fertile ground for growth, and I knew it was. And I thought of grief as an emotional response to loss that came to heal me and to allow my tears to flow and allow, I started to realize, I don't know if you felt this too, but I had really spent very little time in my adult life crying, very little time. And yet I had a lot of tears that I couldn't identify. Of course, they were from the loss of my husband, but I also felt like grief was kind of the great house cleaner. It sort of just went in, and as I allowed more of it to show up, I just felt renewed. And I felt like every tear that I was shedding was somehow lifting my spirit higher, allowing myself to become more of who I was. And, this is all pretty astounding. It's all part of post-traumatic growth, that we go through when we have a really big shock. And I like to think of it as an awakening, something that really awakens our heart to a deeper meaning in life, to a deeper expression of our soul, to maybe even our authentic expression, if you will, that we become more of who we are when we're not holding life so tightly, when we realize that life is imperfect, but that there's a perfect design somehow for what we're going through. And these are all things that I felt really compelled to share in From Heartbreak to Wholeness because, it's a tough journey, as you know, Joan, to go through loss, but there's something really positive that comes out the other side. I just don't want people to miss that possibility.
I agree with you, Kristine, because the work that I'm doing right now is the result of that loss. I would not be doing this work. I would have not created this brand. I would not be speaking with you had I not gone through all of that. And the other thing that I agree with you on is allowing yourself to feel, to cry. So many people feel that they need to hold their feelings in or not give themselves permission to feel what they're feeling. I cried. Sometimes I still cry. And I allow myself to do that because it is cleansing. I agree with you. And that would be my advice to someone who's going through pain and heartbreak right now. What would you say to someone who's in the middle of loss, someone who's suffering?
I would say exactly the same thing. I would say that, being stoic and being, strong in that sense of not crying is only going to hurt you. It's not going to make you strong. It's going to weaken other aspects of you somehow, your health possibly, or other things. So I think that, you're right. The best thing that you can do is just give yourself some time and space to heal, as much time and space as possible. And that might not mean that you get time off from work, so it might mean that you go quieter on the weekends. You give yourself time in nature, you take long, warm, hot baths, you do soothing self-care, do the things that allow yourself to feel your feelings, busying it up and partaking in more to-do busyness isn't always the answer. In fact, I would say it's never the answer when you're in grief. I would say that spending some time in stillness, allowing yourself to maybe even shake if you need to. I don't know how I knew this, but I would lay on the ground and I would let my arms just fly open and my legs, and I would just allow my body to shake until I would cry. And then I would, be in horrible pain, and then the next moment I'd be in bliss. So one thing, is listen to your body too. Your body has a way of teaching you, when you're not feeling enough. You can ask your body, where are you feeling your pain? I felt mine in my stomach. My stomach would hurt. And if my stomach was hurting, I knew I wasn't crying enough, because as soon as I laid down or I sat down and I cried, what would happen? My stomach would feel better. So, just you get these body clues. You know how to do this as a human being. We're wired this way. We're wired to heal, but we have to give ourselves time to heal and space to heal, and the right conditions to heal. So those are the things that I would suggest if you are in heartbreak of any kind. A lot of people are experiencing heartbreak and loss over some, natural disaster that's befallen them or their family members. So there's all sorts of reasons why we go through loss in our lifetime. But we also need to heal those losses too, not the ones that are just from death, or not just, but from death or dying, but the ones that are even the more invisible losses that we have happen in our lives. So, yeah, time and space. Allow yourself, plenty of time in nature and self-care, really good self-care.
Kristine, your book is about making the hero's journey to joy after heartbreak, and I love that you chose the word hero. What does it take to be a hero? What made you choose that word?
That's a great question. And again, it goes back to that earlier comment that you made, Joan, about deciding not to be the victim. That I really identified that was the one huge pivot that somebody could make on the hero's journey, was to not become a victim of their circumstances. And I just want to caveat that by saying this is not to say that your circumstances that you may be presented with are not negative or hard circumstances. That's not what I mean. It's about being able to embrace what is, knowing that this has already happened, not living in the past so much so that you can't move forward on your journey. Moving forward and stepping forward doesn't always mean moving on. We don't move on from people we lose. We carry them forward. And the hero embraces the journey no matter what. The hero stands in the journey and says, I don't necessarily like that this happened. I'm not happy about it, but I am going to step forward with courage. I am going to step forward and be brave. I am going to move into my life in a way that is, somehow stepping into it as opposed to resisting it. These are all aspects of what I define as being the hero or the heroine. I mean, I chose hero because, you'll find women will respond to the word hero better than men will respond to the word heroine.
Yeah. Well, and Kristine, as you were talking, I just kept thinking that it's so important to have a conversation like this, because it shows people who are in pain. I remember when I was going through it, I was so inspired by the stories of people that gave me hope, that showed me that it's not going to be this way forever. And I think that it's so important that we're talking about this and that you're sharing this.
Oh, yeah, because, I found that for me, first of all, I found that when I wrote the first book that I ever did on loss was called Heartbroken Open, a memoir through loss to self-discovery. I found that to be so healing, to just share my story and share my journey. And then I held Heartbroken Open circles in my home, and I had all these widows that were in their 40s coming to my house from all over the Bay Area, and divorcees, people, had gone through great loss in their divorces, coming to my house. And what I found was that there was such power and strength and hope and encouragement and healing as we share our story. And at the back of each chapter of From Heartbreak to Wholeness, I have a soul inquiry. It's really the questions that I hope to lead each person on their own hero's journey through, and then a writing process. So I find that if you can sit down and process your story and write it from the hero's perspective, then you'll be well on your way to healing from that perspective and stepping into your life in a very heroic way. And, this is something that it doesn't matter what other people think of your story or anything. What matters is that you tell the story, what stories we tell ourselves. So if we tell ourselves a story that promotes us as the hero, then we step into our life with courage and a lot of hope and knowing that we're stronger from what's happened. And, I just, that's what I find has been so healing and so helpful, is for people to be able to share their story. And even if it's just with one person or their family, just to be able to tell their story is incredibly healing.
The book is From Heartbreak to Wholeness, The Hero's Journey to Joy by Kristine Carlson. If you'd like to get more information about Kristine or her work, you can visit FromHeartbreakToWholeness.com. Kristine, in our final moments, what's the takeaway? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
I'd like to just tell all of you that, my whole thing, the thing that really saved me in losing my beloved and moving into my life in a way where I wake up every day just feeling tremendous joy, and it's such an inner joy. It's not something that's happening because of outside circumstances. I just feel alive and joyful. And what I would love to say to anyone is that there's always hope. There's always hope in this life, and that life in and of itself is a journey, that we are on a human journey, and that's why we're here. And the more you embrace that journey, the more you love that journey for what it is, the happier you'll be, and the more joy you'll return to, the more joy you'll experience. And I really believe that we're here to experience really true and lasting joy. And yes, there's suffering on the journey too. And I hope that my book helps you in those suffering moments and gives you the encouragement and inspiration you need. And I just want to thank you, Joan, for the work that you're doing for the world. How beautiful what you've done to turn your heartbreak into something so powerful. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristine, and thank you for joining us and for sharing such a powerful story of hope. As I said, these are really important conversations that must be had, and your work and in everything that you're doing is just a testament that we can move through any challenge that we have in life and come out, as you say, in wholeness. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Conversations with Joan. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.